We talked until now mostly about applications where we do more or less the same the pathologist does, but help them just to be faster, more accurate, and better. But what you can actually do with that AI is you can do also new things the pathologist can't do. We have now 150,000 patients where we have the sequencing of the tumor, it's a cancer sequencing plus these slides. So you can actually learn to predict the underlying mutations based on how the cancer looks like. And if that's a mutation where you have actually a drug to target it, that makes a huge difference. Because now you can deploy something that's actually rather cheap on the standard modality for cancer diagnostics across the globe, and that allows you to really democratize access to healthcare. We are just at the beginning of the wealth of information you can get out of these slides, and that will have dramatic impact on patient care.
Hey everybody, this week I'm joined by Thomas Fuchs, Chief Scientist and Founder at Paige. Paige is transforming cancer diagnostics by building novel, large model AI applications as part of a full turnkey digital platform, driving pathology modernization through affordable digitization and clinical grade AI, improving efficiency, turnaround times, decreasing costs, enabling precision diagnostics, and improving patient outcomes. Sounds awesome, Thomas. I'm absolutely delighted to have you. How are you doing, sir? Welcome.
Thank you, James. It's great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
You're very welcome, sir.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, same. Yeah, you're doing some incredible things in cancer diagnostics. And yeah, really looking forward to getting into this with you because, yes, chief scientist and founder as well. We might be able to geek out on the science, which would be quite nice. Mm-hmm. I don't often get the chance to do that and the tech. So first of all, whereabouts are you speaking to us from? Where are you based?
So I'm in New York City, as is Paige. So we're in Manhattan.
Very nice.
And enjoying the humid summer in the city.
Yeah, you must have air-conditioned offices and labs out there. Anyway, right, before I get into that, before I get too jealous of the weather. Listen, Thomas, the way we start these is obviously for you to tell your story. Now, obviously, you've done a few things in the run-up to Paige, and so it'd be awesome to hear all about it. And how does one go from humble beginnings to becoming a chief scientist and a founder of a company like Paige AI?
Yeah, like so often, it was certainly a very winded road. As you can hear from my accent, I'm originally from Austria, same town as Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Very nice. Yeah. Do you know him?
Unfortunately not. No, it's not that small. It's the second biggest town in Austria, which of course makes it small globally, but it's in the southeast. It's Graz. It's a very nice place.
Very nice.
But since I'm not as sporty as he is, I had to stick to science, and that was a different road. I was always
just as glamorous, though, right? as the movie industry and the bodybuilding industry, like just as glamorous.
Yeah, I'm on a podcast with you, right? I don't know if.
Oh, there you go. Saying all the right things, Thomas. Fantastic.
I was always a nerd. I was coding since I'm 10. I had my first startup in Austria with 16. That was in the 90s. We built multimedia CD-ROMs. That was a thing back then on Austrian history. So I wrote the whole hypertext system from scratch without an internet. That was an adventure back then. But who would have imagined that the overlap between people who actually can use a CD-ROM and are interested in Austrian history is not that big? So the market fit wasn't really there. So I focused then more on universities. I studied mathematics and computer science in Graz. Did my master thesis at Siemens Cobalt Research in Princeton. It's the first time when I came to the US and fell in love with the country. Was then lucky to get a PhD slot at ETH Zurich, which had one of the few machine learning labs back then. It was, of course, also very nerdy. The largest international machine learning conference was 400 people, and that, of course, changed drastically. And one day, the pathologist came into the lab and just wanted to have some high-level statistics on the manual readouts, and showed us some histology slides or microscope slides with cancer on it. And I very naively thought, oh, that looks simple, right? These are just roundish objects. The cell should be easy to detect. And now we are 20 years later and still can't do it perfectly. And that set me on the road for computational pathology. We coined the term in 2006, 7, yeah. So that started the field of computational pathology. And after that, I did a postdoc at Caltech in computer vision, and was working with West Coast hospitals, and also a little bit with NASA, with the Jet Propulsion Lab, because I'm as many tech nerds. I'm, of course, a big science fiction fan and always loved space exploration.
Excellent. So you did some rocket science?
Yeah, I actually got very lucky and they hired me, and I played rocket scientist for a few years.
Amazing.
So we used the same algorithms we developed to detect, for example, cells and differentiate cancer from non-cancer for images from the Mars rover to differentiate different terrain types, sand from gravel, rocks, and so forth. So for autonomous driving on Mars, so it doesn't get stuck. And yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Wow.
But unfortunately, even in the US, there's not enough funding for space exploration. And
Elon's got it all now, hasn't he?
Yes, that's great. Of course, fabulous, right? Rocketry is outstanding. But of course, it's mostly interesting what you do afterwards, right? You have to go somewhere and do some science with space probes. But of course, SpaceX is amazing, and we wouldn't have that active commercial area without what he started. So that's certainly an outstanding achievement. But it still takes 10 years for a space probe to fly for the next mission, let's say to Jupiter or something. And then the hardware, of course, you have on these probes is radiation hardened. That means you're usually 10 years back in terms of hardware. So you could actually never run a neural network or anything complicated on the probes themselves. So you have to keep them very, very simple. So I wanted to go back into healthcare. And then decided to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City. Built the computational pathology program back then. We started digitizing at scale. And 2017, I spun out Paige from MSK. It's actually my third company. We also did one in Zurich. That was a language learning SaaS company. In 2017, we built also a 17-18. What we did, we built a large compute cluster to do large-scale machine learning, which these days is a no-brainer, right? But still back then, people didn't do that, right? So that was certainly part of the success. Then I built the company, hired the first 25 people. We got breakthrough designation by the FDA for the first AI in all of oncology. And then later in 2019, we had an executive team, CEOs, and several leadership for the company over the last few years. I could step back a little bit, do more science, move to Mount Sinai, where I built the artificial intelligence department at Mount Sinai. And that's where I am, all New York City. And yeah, a lot of fun. And finally, the world is digitizing, and the world is catching up on AI, which is great, of course. If you are in that space, everything was too slow for much too long. And now finally we have some action.
Yeah, I have a question about how you put a career like this together, because it seems like you sort of unapologetically just followed what you're interested in, but managed to be at the top of almost every single stage. Like the institutions that you're talking about, Caltech, Princeton, like Mount Sinai, like you're at the top of every single stage of this, and you're sort of maxing the career out at every available point. I think for so many people that are trying to put careers together and to reach the next stage, I think it's quite inspirational that to be able to do that and find your way from coding to rocket science and applying it there, and then to apply it to your interests in healthcare. And I just wonder how you've done that, or what advice you've got for that. Is it a case that you picked the things that you were so interested in, and therefore it never felt like work, and you were able to do all these things? Was it that you're just pure talent and just able to, commit to it and be the best? Or is it a mixture of all of those things? Or I don't know, is that a fair judgment?
That's a very kind depiction, of course. For most people, it would be too much wandering around, right? And they want to stay in one lane for most of their lives.
Yeah.
It's also, if you retell the story, it seems very sequential, but of course, in practice, a lot is often done in parallel, and then one thing works and the other thing does not. Right? So I love building things. So that's dear to my heart. I think that's my main character. That's why I founded 3 companies or built a new department and so forth. I'm just a builder. Right? But it's a privilege to do that in science, right? Where you have the combination with deep science. You're not just, selling Coca-Cola cans or something. Right? Which of course are great businesses, right? But the thing you're actually working on, if that thing is also interesting and even can help people, that's of course a huge privilege, and that of course helps to drive that forward. I would not even suggest young people would follow that same path, right? Because it is hard and cumbersome to do everything at the same time. It can also be done easier, right? Or I don't know, if the first startup would have worked out in the 90s, then my path would have been different. Right? But it's certainly, I think there's a lot of value to have broad interest, be broadly interested, not just in topics, but also in how does a company work, right? How can I be efficient? How can I run a lab efficiently? So starting a lab is very much like, for example, a startup, right? There's a lot of overlap. You have a broad cost function you have to optimize. You also have to get funding somewhere, pitch investors, write grants, have different kinds of staff and so forth, and various metrics. And so you can learn a lot from these different areas and put them to use in the other areas. But there are certainly much straighter lines for careers than what I ended up doing. But it was certainly a privilege and an exciting and diverse journey. So it was never boring, ever.
Yeah. I think when you like building things, you either know that or you don't about yourself, and you want to put things out into it. I think if you're coding since 10 and, building a CD-ROM business at 16 and doing all that locally, etc., I think you know that you're a builder, and I think you almost have to do those things alongside, don't you? Because there's the traditional academic path where you're trying to give yourself, I don't know, like the safety nets that you need in order to get career and stability and all those things. But the builder in you is the part that wants to take risk. And the builder in you is then going to take risk on top of the stability, I guess, of the normal journey. It's definitely not for people like me to do the building without that stability. I'm happy doing the building in my own time and take those risks and give myself that optionality if it is on top of that more stable career journey. And I think, yeah, you've just managed to max it out. I think obviously because you're talented, and obviously because you just love this stuff, that it's probably quite easy for you to put the work in. I actually want to talk about something that you mentioned actually quite near the middle of your story about computational pathology when you first got into it. And it's funny, you talked about that naivety associated with, there's some slides here and there's some cells on those slides, like must be relatively straightforward to see one from the other and count them and, see what percentage chance one's got to turn into another, all that sort of stuff. But you said 20 years later, here you still are. Can you talk to me about that? Maybe from even like a tech and a scientific perspective. Why is it so difficult for pathology to be digitized and automated using AI?
Right. So I think first to the naivety, I think that's a key ingredient, right? If I would have been able to properly judge how difficult that is, right, you would have never started it. And I think that's true for many founders, for many areas, right? You just have to take the leap. You have the tools at your disposal that might be coding or math or whatever is necessary. And then you just give it your best try and run with it, right? And you can get much further than you would have thought. But if you would have seen the whole picture, I guess then you wouldn't have done it. But it's true for most startups, right? And most tech. So I think that's certainly an important ingredient that you just take the jump and run with it. So pathology is difficult because it actually has not changed in 150 years. So it's in the US, 90% of labs are still analog, so not even digital. It's one of the last disciplines that's not digital in medicine. So if you have, for example, let's say you have a chest pain, you go to a radiologist, you get a CT or an MR. And then if they find something, you have to take a biopsy. So that's a needle biopsy of tissue that's then put on a microscope slide. And then a pathologist looks at that microscope slide under an old-fashioned microscope and tries to find the cancer and decide what kind of cancer it is. And that literally has not changed in 150 years since pathology was more or less invented by Rudolf Virchow at the Charité in Berlin back then. So that's very unique also in the healthcare space. And most people are always very surprised to learn how that's done. But practically, you do not have cancer until a pathologist says so. So it's absolutely germane, right, in the whole medical edifice, what that diagnosis is. And that's, of course, highly subjective and a very difficult task. So it depends who your pathologist is, what treatment you get, and so forth. So there's clearly a space where any kind of technology in the eye that helps the pathologist to be more reproducible, better in what they do, maybe do even more like predicting underlying genomics based on the image, would help dramatically the patient. So that means there's a lot of change management for a very old discipline, right? Just to go digital. And in contrast to radiology, where the film was replaced by digital scanners, in pathology you still produce the glass slides and then you have to digitize them. So the digitization is an extra step. But of course, it brings all these benefits, not just AI, but you can, of course, sign out remotely now. You can send cases around the world for second opinions. You can go to the archive and so forth. So there's clearly a lot of benefit for the pathologist there. But then it, of course, hinges on the US, especially on the reimbursement system, if that digitization is pushed forward faster or slower. It's better in some European countries. So the UK, for example, has a large government project that also encourages digitization, and there are many trusts within the NHS that are already digital or going digital. So Paige has a subsidiary in Great Britain, and we're working with many of these trusts and also have prospective trials, for example, in the UK to prove out the health economics for nice briefs and so forth. And then there are countries like the Netherlands or most of the Scandinavian countries who are digitized to a very high degree. So the US is certainly lacking in that space. And so before you can do any smart AI on top of it, you have to go digital. And that's also one reason why Paige, in addition to building all the fabulous AI we're probably going to talk about, Paige also built the whole workflow platform and the SaaS business that really helps the digitization going forward.
So how did you go originally from an idea to MVP? What was the initial build? What was the initial component?
Again, I can only speak, of course, from my experience, and that's very different because I worked in computational pathology a long time before I founded Paige. Because of my entrepreneurial spirit, of course, we always wanted to do that. And already in California, I started planning for it, came up with the name back then. So Paige actually stands for something. It stands for pathology. It stands for Pathology Artificial Intelligence Guidance Engine. And I can remember I was driving down from LA to San Diego for a conference. I thought we need something better to talk about these statistical learning methods, right? So that also physicians can talk about it and ask, so what's Paige's assessment? What's Paige's score? And as you know, short of ChatGPT, all large AIs had female names until then, like Siri and Alexa and Nell and so forth, Cortana. And Paige seemed a proper name to do so, and that's how we named the company and our products. So there was a clear need from the science side and from the clinician side for a long time, right? The question was really on the product side, how do you build something that could pass muster for the regulatory agencies? And then also, how can you actually get that into the clinic? Again, platform integration, workflow, and then provide, of course, utility that entices physician to use it or oncologists to actually demand it. Right? That, of course, was in many cases a long-winded journey to come up with the product that fulfills these needs. And it's been our portfolio. So Paige has, in addition to the platform, we have Paige Prostate. That's the AI that's FDA approved. So we got breakthrough in 2019, approval in 2021. It's still the only AI, by the way, that's approved in pathology. While there are hundreds in radiology and pathology, there's just one. Because the FDA sees the diagnostic space as much more critical than the screening space. So that means the hurdles of proofs are higher, and none of the competitors could actually follow there. And then there is a breast suite and bladder and lung and also other diseases. And with the foundation model we might want to talk about, we can now actually do pan-cancer applications. So we really try to build an AI that's useful for all pathologists, so for all disciplines, and thus also for all patients, so that you not just have breast or prostate, but also the rare cancers.
Let's talk about the product a little bit more. You mentioned, and it's wonderful sort of how you frame this, that, the product needs to be fitting from a regulatory perspective, a workflow perspective, and a utility perspective. That's a fantastic framework, especially for any clinician that's listening, to know that that's what their tech founder is thinking with the product that they're building for their department. I think knowing that those things are really taken into consideration is obviously the regulatory, but I think the utility and the workflow perspective is just so important. So let's talk about the product. Very practically speaking, what are your suite of products, or what is your suite of products doing? And talk to that utility component for me. What is the real utility here? And what is the value that you're creating inside those healthcare systems?
Sure. So very practically, so after the biopsy is taken out and the glass slide is produced, these slides are put into scanners, and then the slides are scanned and become very large images. These are 100,000 pixels times 50,000 pixels, and you can have many of these slides. So if you have a prostate biopsy, usually have 12 or 24 needles, that ends up to be 12 or 24 slides usually. If you have in breast cancer, if you have a mastectomy, so if the breast is removed, you can come up with 200 slides. And then the task for the pathologist is within that infinite sea of cells, so millions of cells on a single slide, you have to find the few that are cancerous, right? And these can be very small lesions. So it's really for looking for that needle in a haystack. That's a very difficult and cumbersome task. And that's why reads in pathology can take a long time. So half an hour, even longer, depending on the case. While in radiology, usually that goes very fast. The resolution is much, much lower. The radiologists can look at it. Sometimes they're done in seconds or in minutes. So that's very different. And of course, if you have the task of finding that needle in the haystack, it depends very much how good the pathologist is,
Absolutely.
how much time they have, if it's in the
Absolutely.
morning or the evening. So these are very human
Absolutely.
concerns, how well they are trained, how big their workload is. So if the AI can take away the task and really point you immediately to the needle and say, look here, that looks cancerous, that makes a huge difference. And it also gives assertion to the patient that actually everything was found and not missed. So we actually proved that out for prostate cancer on 14,000 patients from 800 different institutions out of 45 countries. So these slides were produced in China, in India, in Europe, in South America, in all kinds of rural areas in the US. And we could show that the AI consistently, regardless from what preclinically and chemically processes these slides were produced, could find the cancer. And that's because we built a model that really learned to look at the morphology, so how the cancer looks like, and not just image features like color or brightness changes that could differ a lot. And then we went with that to the FDA, right? It works across the globe, and the FDA said, "Oh, that's cute. We don't care." Because what they want to see is how does it actually influence the pathologist? How does it influence the pathologist's decisions? So that took 2 years because it was all new for them as well to come up with a study and a protocol where we had pathologists do the task before without AI and then do the same task with AI, and then we did a comparison. And there were very experienced pathologists who were in the field for 20, 30 years, also younger ones that did that remotely on site. And it was a very difficult data set that was enriched for difficult cases. And what that study showed is that we could reduce the error rate, so the miss rate, by 70%. 70. And usually in the past, in radiology or so, that was bought with a high false positive rate, right? And that actually also decreased slightly. So we could have that huge increase in sensitivity without false positives. And that led the FDA actually to do their own press release saying this technology has the potential to save lives, which was very humbling. And that shows the utility not only to the pathologist, but especially also to the patient. And you could very well imagine a world, hopefully not too far in the future, where patients will demand it or insurers will demand it, right? Because it's just malpractice if you don't use the best tools available for such a critical task.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's been a question that's come up on this podcast before, which is that is it unethical not to be using AI at a time where you can increase sensitivity and specificity in a proven way? Is it actually unethical not to be putting the processes and the systems in place in order to adopt it? Is it unethical not to be funding it? Is it like these questions have certainly like come up a lot. And it's a perfect example of that, isn't it? My question is, why only one has got through FDA? So is that attached to is it the difficulty of creating the technology? Is it jumping through some of those? Are there particular FDA hurdles that people are falling out? Like why just you guys? What's the differentiator between you guys and the rest of the people trying to do this and perhaps that have got through some regulatory in other markets? Why not the FDA and why not any competitors?
So I think to a large degree, it is really quality of the products. So to build what we did, we digitized slides for years. We digitized now over 4 million slides together with Sloan Kettering. I built a whole health informatics system where we actually tied together the data from all kinds of databases, from the laboratory information systems, from the EHR, other databases with the slides. All that has to be de-identified and then made ready for processing. On top of that, you need computation. So we built a large compute cluster with NVIDIA, Paige's compute cluster is still the largest standalone cluster for pathology. It's in New Jersey. And now for the foundation models, of course, we need much more, and that's why we work with Microsoft Research to do these. But then, if you have the data and the compute, you still need new AI. So there are no off-the-shelf tools or computer vision tools that could be used to actually solve this problem, because the amount of data is so much, right? And so a lot of work previously, up to the founding of Paige, went actually into machine learning development. So we had 2018, we had Nature Medicine paper on multiple instance learning at scale. So that was the first approach where you didn't have to manually annotate the data. We could directly learn from the pathology reports and the slides. And that allowed us to train from tens of thousands of slides. So that was a phase change in that space that led to that quality. And that was difficult to emulate. And now we're in the next phase. So we're now building unsupervised models, self-supervised models, similar to the GPT models in text. We do that in the microscopic world. And there these models are very large. So as comparison, for example, the recent one, so we called our foundation model Virchow, after the founder of pathology. So it's a V1, Virchow 1 model that came out, and there is a series of models that will follow. And these models currently have, so the first one had 3 times more data than all of Netflix.
Wow.
So think of all the Netflix shows you watch, all the movies you watch, and you count every pixel in all these shows.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just a third of the data used for the current publication. And the model that we are training currently has 10 times more data than all of Netflix. So that's a scale that's, of course, very unique.
Yes.
And you need the whole ML ops stack and all tricks of the trade to build models at that scale, just to have fast I/O to get the data to the GPUs fast enough and so forth. So it takes a lot of machinery, a lot of machine learning, a lot of science to build these models, and then they have to be useful, right? And there in that wide space, that's of course also a very difficult task to find out what's actually useful for the pathology.
The other one you mentioned was workflow as well, and the importance of building to the workflow. Has that been one of the reasons that you guys have had such scale? I can imagine it is, because you've talked a lot actually about people demanding this, which I think is interesting. This sort of bottom up demand for a technology, for the ground floor workers demanding it, or the patients demanding it. And this is a concept that's talked about more and more, especially as information, I think, is distributed a lot easier and quicker these days with all the platforms that people communicate on and all the rest of it, that people can learn about things that can make their lives better, and they can create a swell of demand. And I actually think it's a very important strategy, even for companies that are pure B2B, because of those people in those organizations that can create that demand for you. And so in order to get that bottom up demand, it seems to me that you have to nail this workflow piece. You have to nail the fact that it just fits, it just works, it just makes my life easier. And it's obviously therefore related massively to the utility piece, because then it is just seamless. So what's the key to getting that bit right? How have you guys managed to get that so right?
So that's, the key is, of course, constant interaction with the people who actually use it, right?
It's people, right?
And, the advantage we had is that Paige came out of my lab, right? It was a spin out from Sloan Kettering. And also the reason I'm currently at Mount Sinai, I think there is a huge benefit if you are actually in the trenches with the physicians, right? For years. Right? Not only for a scientific question, but also for very practical product question. Right? You really have to understand where the bottlenecks are. If, for example, if it doesn't integrate well with your laboratory information system, if they have to switch applications, you're dead. Right? It's a very simple thing. It doesn't matter how good your AI is, or how the reports are structured and so forth. Very mundane things, but that's the key for workflow. Healthcare, as you know, is a very oiled machinery. in these hospitals, you have all these hundreds of steps, and if you lose just a few seconds or minutes somewhere in between, tech will not be used. Right? So it has to be beneficial to the whole workflow. That's also a reason why historically big tech companies, although they had all the machine learning talent, all the GPUs in the world, didn't have any meaningful impact in healthcare. Because if you develop all that stuff outside and throw it over the fence, then nobody's going to use it. So maybe that's one thing you can add to your career advice column. If you really want to affect healthcare, you first have to know how it actually works. And there's value to be in the trenches, although it's of course
know in advance who your customer is going to be in 10 years, and then spend 10 years with them in those trenches, or indeed build something. The better advice is probably build something for those types of people that you have known for 10 years, and you actually know what their problems are, etc. Yes.
But then, of course, as soon as you have the company, customer success is absolutely key, and UX, of course, great UX teams, and we have, of course, pathologists at Paige and fabulous CMO and so forth, who really know that space super well, and then you have to iterate very fast. On the product side, right, and then you have the R&D side, because we are a deep science company. And these are very different, right? You have to operate, of course, the product side differently than the R&D side, because machine learning, as you know, machine learning is the art of failing, right? You build something, you fail, you build something, you fail. And you don't have any products at the end to show, right? The only thing you learn maybe within a few months is you understood the problem better. And that's something very, very unusual for classical software engineers. And software engineering is a beautiful discipline. The more work you put in, the better your code gets. You do some refactoring, you build. It's like building a house, right? While machine learning has the classical science loop, and again, it's just failing constantly. Right? And so you can't do both with the same system, right? If you do Scrum in R&D, you are dead. If you do classical software development the way you would do research, I guess you could never build large things. So that's certainly a very difficult balance for companies and startups to strike if you are in that deep science space.
I want to talk about very quickly about the impact that you're looking to make, obviously, with the suite of products that you now have, and obviously putting so much work into computational pathology as a whole. Then obviously with, intended use and this kind of thing from a regulatory perspective, the requirement to actually build multiple of these to fire them at multiple things with very specific uses seems like, a very, very sensible approach. I'm interested if you think there will be some sort of one big unifying AI at any point, and whether that, whether you can just deploy that against multiple uses. But anyway, probably from a regulatory perspective, it would never pass. But there are certainly people in the UK that have claimed it. That will be on people's minds. But anyway, could you just talk about your approach from that perspective? And I guess, where does this go for Paige in the future? And what's your view of how this plays out overall across the healthcare space globally, as it pertains to various AIs deployed in various places?
Yes. So I talked about the phase change in 2018-19, where we got with tens of thousands of slides, the first models that are really clinically great, so that work for clinical purposes at the on the same kind of data clinician would see. So that was really a phase change from a more sciencey discipline to something that's practically working. Now we have the next change to foundation models in that space. And the foundation model we are building, so that's actually out now, you can download it, it's open for everyone to use, is pan-cancer, so across many different cancer types, across many different image types. And the beauty of that is you can really expand the application from these classical, very tailored products of prostate and breast and so forth to all the cancers. 50% of cancers are rare cancers. So if you get cancer, it's a coin flip. If you have one of the big ones where there are a lot of treatment options and one of the rare ones where there is not. And very often then you also don't get the proper tests. And that leads us to the next stage here. we talked until now mostly about applications where we do more or less the same the pathologist does, but help them just to be faster, more accurate, and better. But what you can actually do with that AI is you can do also new things the pathologist can't do. For example, we have now 150,000 patients where we have the sequencing of the tumor, it's a cancer sequencing plus these slides. So you can actually learn to predict the underlying mutations based on how the cancer looks like. That doesn't work for all, but for some of these mutations, it works. And if that's a mutation where you have actually a drug to target it, that makes a huge difference. Because now you can deploy something that's actually rather cheap on the standard modality for cancer diagnostics across the globe, and get, for example, a prediction of EGFR mutation in lung or FGFR in bladder and so forth, for just a cheap inference run, right? And that allows you to really democratize access to healthcare, because you train these systems at these ivory towers like Mount Sinai, and then you could deploy them in rural areas in the US and across the world. So that's of course a beautiful thing that is possible. So that whole space, that biomarker space, so that's a very critical next step. So we'll see a lot of these digital biomarkers. And most pharma companies already have now, the big ones, internal computational pathology teams, because it's going to be a part of their strategy to actually enroll patients, find the right patients, build reflex tests, maybe where you first do just the image-based test and then do the wet lab test and so forth. And then the next step is actually predicting outcomes. So we have studies where we can show that different morphologies in bile duct cancer and cholangiocarcinoma lead to different survival outcome. Or we can predict response to immunotherapy, right, based on the tumor microenvironment. So there's so much wealth in these slides that are not captured by our human brains yet. Pathologists are amazing. What they can see is great, but they are still limited to each single human who has to learn that, which is a non-natural discipline. They have to look at thousands and thousands of slides and try to find patterns. And that's, of course, something AI can do very well. And so we are just at the beginning of the wealth of information we can get out of these slides, and that will have dramatic impact on patient care. And yeah, that's a beautiful thing that you can actually help patients by writing code. So I never would have thought that possible when I was young, and now it is.
It is beautiful. It's also, seeing the smile across your face when you say that as well. Like, I imagine you can think back to those days coding as a 10-year-old and only hoping or wishing or, something that you could actually create that impact. And it's amazing just seeing that play out in the world now. And as you say, democratize. It's an interesting word, isn't it? Like, the amount of value that's being created in these ivory towers, like you say, that now can be democratized. Like, we can make healthcare cheaper. We can get healthcare to the people that need it most. And I think that's an incredible privilege of what this boom is showing people. We're really seeing models become truly scalable. And I think at a time where healthcare and its costs are just spiraling out of control and have been for some time, and percentage of GDP spend is, it's not going down, is it? And it's not looking particularly great. I think this boom has given a lot of people hope, and I think this is one of the companies that's absolutely front and center with that, with exactly the way you're describing it, because that hope is for me, it's really needed. Like, we work in health tech where we're trying to drive down unit economics. We're trying to make things more scalable. We're trying to keep humans in the loop where they're needed and actually free them up from the administrative burdens to actually be placed at the points of empathy and care. And this is that perfect example of doing that. And the ability to democratize that and spread it globally is incredible. Before I let you go, Thomas, one quick thing. The Nature paper that's come out recently. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that before I let you
go? Sure, happy to. So that's the paper on our Virchow-1 model. So that's the V1 model based on 1.5 million slides. So that's the largest endeavor in computational pathology ever. Just to put that in comparison, so you get actually billions and billions of images of normal size out of these very large slides. So it's certainly one of the largest computer vision models ever trained. And we are also now combining these the models that really understand the image space very well with language models also. So you can actually chat with these images. So you can get text output and text reports. There, of course, it's always a question if you think about the clinic, pathologists actually don't have time to chat with an image, right? They want the results they're interested in. But the combination helps in a lot of areas. Then the next models that are coming up are even larger in terms of parameters and amounts of data. And you see a significant improvement, especially in these biomarkers. So one of the big problems is if you have a new drug, works very well for a specific mutation, but you usually only have, let's say in phase 2, 100 patients, for example. So you could not imagine to actually build a generalizable, reproducible system just on 100 patients, right? That's not enough data for machine learning because the feature space is just so humongous. What now these foundation models allow us, you can now take the Virchow model that has seen millions of slides, literally, that understands normal tissue and cancer tissue and their morphology with very high acuity, hit the ground running on that small data set, right? And do few-shot learning and train a predictor for that mutation. And then you have a biomarker that actually works, and you can start finding the right patients just based on their primary biopsy. And that is a very, very promising approach. If you do that then for many different ones, then you're really approaching finally an area where you have personalized medicine and where you get the right drug for the right patient.
It's incredible. Thomas, listen, an absolute pleasure hearing everything about Paige and what you're up to. I love how your background has got you here. I love how just that attention to coding and becoming an expert in that one thing and being focused has led to this. I'm glad that rocket science you were in transiently, because I think for all the beautiful things that you're creating in health tech, I think the entire space is benefiting. So I really appreciate you. Just one more really quick question. The scale that Paige has had, is there something that we haven't talked about that you can point to as something that people might not realize about how to scale a company that large? Is there a secret? Is there a particular reason that you think you've managed to achieve that scale, or is it the death by 1,000 cuts? Is it actually just is it marginal gains across the whole company?
I mean, you have a lot of the standard answers, of course, do apply. You have to be very agile. You have to. It's a space, of course, we are in where the whole landscape shifts and changes a lot, right? Especially now, there's so much hype and fluff there, right? There are hundreds of copycat companies, and very, of course, often physicians, of course, can't differentiate between the wheat and the chaff, right? That's why, for example, I think regulatory is a good thing because it can help physicians to really prove out which tools are safe and effective and equitable and which are just hot air. Right? And so since the whole landscape changes, a company has to change also quickly with that. So quarterly planning very often does not work, right? You have to be agile enough to say, okay, things change, we change our plan. If you just stick to the plan. There's of course, the famous quote from, what was it, Eisenhower, I think, right? Plans are useless, but planning is essential. Right? And no plan survives contact with reality.
First contact, absolutely.
And you see a lot of companies struggle and die because you have some management who doesn't understand the space, who do quarterly planning and just want to stick with it, are afraid to change the plan or to adapt because they're afraid to act.
Yeah.
And that's absolute key in these spaces. And it's difficult. That's a difficult culture, right? So you have to have an open culture. You have to be able that to criticize ideas and processes. And as you know, most people cannot differentiate between critique of an idea and critique of a person. So building that culture is a very difficult task.
Yes, building a culture where people can raise concerns and ideas that disagree with the founder can be a double-edged sword. It's a wonderful culture to aspire to. When it happens to you, you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, now I'm of course very biased, but there are many examples outside of Paige that often the founders are not the problem, because the founders did it already once, they can do it twice, right? So the founders often push for change constantly. But if you get external management in, they sometimes feel it's set in stone, or that's a magic algorithm. It was in nature. We don't have to do anything. We just build a product and for example, stop R&D. And you see often that this willingness for change, or even throw out old approaches, is much more open for founders, because they did it, than for management, especially if you get it in from a big company, right? They are often very, very calcified in their approaches.
Yes, calcified, ossified, etc.
But again, of course, I'm biased to let frog.
Well, we'll let you off, Thomas. We'll let you off. It's a pleasure having you on, sir. For people that want to learn more about Paige AI, I assume they go to the website. But what's the best place for them to go to learn more?
Yeah, please go to the website. If you're interested, read the paper. If you are actually in that field, download the model, play with the model, try how it works on your data. If it can be useful, that would be great. Let us know. And it takes a whole, more than a village, many cities and countries to change cancer care, and we can only do that together. And I think the culture of having these large open models is great, and will drive forward that field very quickly. And we try to do our small part in that area.
Thank you, Thomas.